Okay, welcome back, everybody. This next session of the educational is Building Mass Movements and the Revolutionary Party with Daniel Terade, Yvonne Anson, and Chris Zavasaki. But before we do that, we're going to welcome Josh Floyd from New Brunswick. And Josh is chair of the New Brunswick NDP Socialist Caucus, and he is also the New Brunswick NDP Executive Secretary. So, Josh is going to read a famous allegory of class struggle, the story of Mouseland. Go ahead, Josh.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. And it's been a great education conference, and I'm glad to be here today. I'm going to read Mouseland. Okay. Mouseland was a place where all the mice lived and played, were born and died, and they lived much the same as you and I do. They even had a parliament, and every 4 years they had an election. Used to walk to the polls and cast their ballots. Some of them even got a ride to the polls and got a ride for the next 4 years thereafterwards, too. Just like you and me, and every time on election day, all the little mice used to cast their ballot in the ballot box, and they used to elect a government made up of big, fat, black cats. Now, if you think it was strange that mice should elect a government made up of cats, you just look at the history of Canada for the last 90 years and maybe more, and maybe you'll see that they weren't any stupider than we were. Good laws for cats. Now, I'm not saying anything against the cats. They were nice fellows. They conducted their government with dignity and they passed good laws. That is, laws that were good for cats. But the laws that were good for cats weren't good for mice. One of the laws said that mouse holes had to be big enough so that a cat could get its paw in. Another law said that mice could only travel at certain speeds so that a cat could get his breakfast without too much effort. The laws were good laws for cats, but oh, they were hard on the mice. And life was getting harder and harder. And when the mice couldn't put up with it anymore, they decided that something had to be done about it. So they went en masse to the polls and they voted the black cats out. They put in the white cats. Now, the white cats had to put up a terrific campaign. All they said all Mouseland needs is more vision. They said the trouble with Mouseland is these round mouse holes we got. If you put us in, we'll establish square mouse holes. And they did. And the square mouse holes were twice as big as the round mouse holes. And now the cat could get both of its paws in. And life was tougher than ever. And when they couldn't take that anymore, they voted the white cats out and put the black ones in again. And then they went to the white cats and then to the black cats. They even tried half black and half white cats. They called that a coalition. They even got one government made up of cats with spots on them. They were cats that tried to make a noise like a mouse, but they ate like a cat. You see, my friends, the trouble wasn't the color of the cat. The trouble was that they were cats, and because they were cats, they naturally looked after cats instead of mice. Presently, there came along a little mouse who had an idea. My friends, watch out for the little fellow with an idea. And he said to the other mice, look, fellows, why do we keep electing a government made up of cats? Why don't we elect a government made up of mice? Oh, they said, he's a Bolshevik. Lock him up. So they put him in jail. But I want to remind you that you can lock up a mouse or a man, but you can't lock up an idea.
Thank you very much, Josh. That was great. Okay, so now we'll come back to our discussion, building mass movements and a revolutionary party. And as I said, our first speaker is Daniel. Daniel emigrated to Canada as a child refugee from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Inspired by the discovery of insulin and his brother's experience with type 1 diabetes, he committed himself to changing the world for the better as a scientist. Daniel obtained his PhD from the University of Toronto in the Department for Laboratory Medicine Pathobiology in 2021. Daniel is a union steward in QP Local 3902 and ran for Secretary Treasurer at the 2021 Ontario Federation of Labour Convention. Today, Daniel lectures at both the University of Toronto and Toronto Metropolitan University in the life sciences. He also ran for Toronto District School Board trustee in Parkdale High Park, Ward 7. As a member of the Municipal Social Alliance, he is the Toronto Region Organizer for Socialist Action. Welcome, Daniel.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, comrades. The fall educational, along with our summer educational, are always highlights. I really enjoy learning from others and getting to throw in some of my own ideas and just seeing how things, how we come out of this. So in the topic of building mass movements and the Revolutionary Party, there were 5 ideas I kind of wanted to discuss in these 20 minutes. First is, where does revolutionary energy come from? The split between anarchism and socialism, the role of the Revolutionary Party, abstentionism versus participation in labor and the NDP. And then lastly, I want to finish with discussing a very important tactic in the Revolutionary Socialist Toolkit, known as the United Front, and I will discuss a few important examples from recent essay history. So first, the question of revolution, it really remains the ultimate question in any society that's based on exploitation and oppression. And before addressing the role of the Revolutionary Party, I think we first need to understand what drives the masses towards revolutionary conclusions in the first place. As a materialist and drawing on a Marxist tradition, I think 2 quotes really suffice to kind of explain where revolutionary energy comes from. First, a really famous quote from Karl Marx in the first chapter of the Communist Manifesto, quote, "The development of modern industry, therefore, cuts from under its feet the very foundation on which the bourgeoisie produces and appropriates products. What the bourgeoisie therefore produces above all are its own gravediggers. Its fall and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable." And second, I wanted to share a slightly longer quote from Leon Trotsky, writing in 1931 on the role of strikes in a revolution. And in this case, he's writing on what's happening in Spain at the time. Quote, "First of all, it is necessary to make clear that this violent elemental outburst of strikes is the inevitable outcome of the character of the revolution itself, being in a certain sense its basis. The overwhelming majority of the Spanish proletariat does not know what organization means. During the time the dictatorship lasted, the new generation of workers grew up, which is lacking in independent political experience. The revolution awakens, and in this lies its force, the most backward, downtrodden, the most oppressed, toiling masses. And so from this dialectical material point of view, the necessity for infinite growth under capitalism, of more and more profit and wealth accumulation for a tiny capitalist class, leads to an ever more exploited working class and ever increasing oppression overall. And it's this class conflict and class antagonism that provides the raw material for the uprising of the masses and for the revolutionary struggle itself. So the first lesson then is that capitalism itself creates the necessary conditions for revolution. And we just need to translate the struggles of everyday workers and oppressed people under capitalism such that they understand this as being a class war. The second question focuses on the role of the so-called advanced worker. And so that sounds very prescriptive, advanced worker, but really the advanced worker is not superior to other workers. They just simply have enough class consciousness to be able to embrace revolutionary ideas. And at this present epoch in capitalist society, the advanced worker constitutes a minority of workers, the minority of workers that are sufficiently class conscious. And so then in the anti-capitalist leftist sphere populated by the advanced worker, we need to address then the split that occurred between anarchists and socialists, because in the split, one can probe the necessity of the Revolutionary Party. Anarchists on one hand completely ignore and avoid the question of the Revolutionary Party, while most socialists, I think, fall into a camp where they believe in the necessity for building a revolutionary party, although there's definitely some nuance there. One thing that both anarchists and socialists can agree on is that capitalism needs to be smashed, needs to be entirely overthrown, and even both advocate a communist vision, a society where neither private property nor state apparatus exists. But while socialists argue that before such a communist society can be achieved, it is necessary for workers to first seize control from the capitalist class itself, anarchists dismiss the need for any such intermediate step. In their mind, any sort of hierarchical organization is inherently unjust and must be resisted, even if it constitutes a transitory state between capitalism and communism. So instead, anarchists attempt to advance directly from capitalism to communism by either building outside of capitalism or instead just burning down the capitalist structure and I guess living in the ashes. The extent to which anarchists do organize resistance, their tactics are exceedingly decentralized and decisions are made by consensus rather than majority rule. And so while on the whole, anarchism and socialism are compatible, at least in what their end goal and end vision is, the tactics advanced by the anarchists, at least in my view, seem naive and excessively utopian. We know that the capitalists with their military, police, their incredible wealth and private property dominate basically all systems on the planet. And history shows that any attempt to shift power from the capitalist class to the majority classes is fiercely resisted by the bourgeoisie, whether it be military invasion, coup d'etat, or reactionary violence. They will use anything and everything to maintain their own control. And so we can see that with a modern anarchist project, Occupy Wall Street, which attempted to carve out its own anarchist spaces in parks across the world, like in Central Park, only for the police, which is an arm of capitalist domination, to brutalize and arrest en masse those involved with the Occupy Wall Street movement. Another example with greater stakes, but slightly further back in history, is what occurred during the Spanish Civil War, taking place between 1936 and 1939. Our dearly departed comrade Robbie Mahood wrote on this in his booklet on anarchism and socialism, which you can find for free as a PDF on the Socialist Action website. Quote, Spain experienced a revolutionary upsurge in the mid-1930s, culminating in mass factory occupations and confiscation of large estates and enterprises. There was a radical land distribution in the countryside. The anarchists were in a commanding position in Barcelona, the epicenter of the mass uprising. Yet in 1937, at the crucial moment when power had effectively passed into the hands of workers and poor peasants, the leadership of the large anarchist organizations drew back and ceded power to the bourgeoisie and its Stalinist allies. They could not countenance the formation of a state based on a new class power. In the end, they even joined the bourgeois Republican government and were active participants in the demobilization and violent repression of revolutionary workers and rural Spain laborers who did not want to abandon their gains. At that moment, the struggle to defeat Franco was lost, and the result was 36 years of a fascist dictatorship. And so it's important to remember that even up until the present day, things might seem quiet, but the masses routinely rise up in spontaneous mass resistance all across the world. For example, when police murdered George Floyd in 2020, millions of people spontaneously in response rose up around the world and even torched police stations. When the US and its NATO coalition invaded Iraq in 2003, hundreds of thousands of people, again, took to the streets in New York City and Toronto, around the world, to oppose this imperialist project. And the capitalist catastrophe, which was covered at length in our 4 o'clock session on eco-socialism, we see that this also periodically leads to outbursts of mass opposition. The biggest rallies and marches in Canada opposing climate catastrophe are organized on the last Friday of each September by Fridays for Future, a movement sparked by Greta Thunberg. And these marches, though, peaked in 2019. We saw 30,000 people in Toronto, 500,000 people in Montreal, millions around the world marching in opposition to climate change. These large numbers demonstrate clearly that the appetite for change exists in working class and oppressed people. But Fridays for Future is not a revolutionary organization or even a political party. There are no central demands, there's no political or even tactical program, except for some sort of vague opposition to climate change, which gets summed up with some somewhat strange chants like, hey, hey, ho, ho, climate change has got to go, a chant that doesn't address where climate change ought to go or who ought to lead it there. Without political leadership or democratic decision-making bodies, Fridays for Future easily was co-opted by agents of the bourgeoisie class, most readily apparent in Montreal, where we actually saw the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau join those 500,000 protesters, despite presiding over the country that has the highest emissions per capita in the whole world. When Greta Thunberg began Fridays for Future, it tapped into growing anxiety and despair over the future hospitability of our planet. But without a concrete political and tactical program, you see momentum just kind of slipping away. And from those tens and hundreds of thousands of people marching in Canada in 2019, the most recent Fridays for Future rallies this year had maybe hundreds and thousands instead. And that's not because the climate crisis is gone or because we made any sort of real progress there, but because revolutionary leadership was not sufficiently advanced to channel the legitimate desire for system change into a revolutionary struggle to actually achieve system change. With these examples in mind, I want to turn to another Trotsky quote that really demonstrates the need for a revolutionary party to channel mass anti-capitalist energy towards socialist revolution. Quote, "Without a guiding organization, the energy of the masses would dissipate like steam not enclosed in a piston box. But nevertheless, what moves things is not the piston or the box, but the steam." So this is an analogy I find myself alluding to quite a bit. And it really breaks the revolutionary struggle into two components: the mass revolutionary desire of an increasingly exploited and oppressed class of people, and the revolutionary leadership of a revolutionary party. If we accept that a revolutionary party is necessary to channel mass alienation, disillusionment, exploitation, and oppression towards ever sharpening class conflict, the question that remains is how to build the revolutionary party. As a revolutionary party in utero, what is the role of socialist action in this current late stage of monopoly capitalism? The way I see it, there's a gradient of responses that a revolutionary party can take on in response to what's going on in the world. You can see accelerationism, abstentionism, and active participation in all mass struggles. Accelerationism is a bit of a weird idea. It's the idea that material conditions need to get worse before the proletariat will be roused from their slumber and fight against our common enemies. And to this end, then, accelerationists cheer for and even contribute to the further intensification of misery on a global scale. Thankfully, I don't really see this position reflected in any sort of real sense on the organized left in Canada. Not surprising, really, because it's an incredibly patronizing position that people need to suffer even more before they decide to take matters into their own hand. And really, the masses want to better the material conditions rather than further erode them. So accelerationism is kind of a dead end and a weird contradiction in of itself. And I see it mostly embraced by a subset of people that are so disconnected from political organizing as to be convinced that material conditions are not ripe enough for revolution. The opposite, I think, is the case in this late stage of capitalism. Material conditions are in fact so ripe, they're kind of like a mushy banana. So while accelerationism, I don't see as a real option that people are putting forward, abstentionism is much more common on the revolutionary left in Canada. You have examples of revolutionary parties that, while attempting to build their own party, their own ranks, they completely ignore the existing arenas of mass struggle that currently exist in the Canadian state. For various reasons, these revolutionary parties isolate themselves from the labor movement, which includes mass union organizations and the labor-based NDP. They isolate themselves from liberation struggles, including the abolition struggle that seeks to defund, disarm, and disband the police. They isolate themselves from the struggle for land back and the Indigenous self-determination struggle. And regarding the labor movement and the NDP, these abstentionist groups rightfully critique the bureaucratic crust made up of opportunists, careerists, and outright traitors. But in attempting to maintain their ideological purity by never associating or interacting with non-Marxists, they end up isolating themselves from the actual gravediggers produced by capitalism. So as Trotsky pointed out in that first quote I shared, the gravediggers that capitalism produces are the most backward, downtrodden, the most oppressed toiling masses, which lack independent political experience and do not know what organization means. So as material conditions ripen, that is to say, as oppression and exploitation increases, the very people in whom a revolutionary urge arises are those who lack political experience, lack a coherent worldview to explain society's decline, and are at times prone to reaction. Abstentionism in the face of this empirical observation means reducing the Revolutionary Party to essentially an academic reading group that is a complete non-factor in the class war. So what is Socialist Action's approach? Well, we're obviously not accelerationist, nor are we abstentionist. We build Socialist Action as a revolutionary party that declares as loudly and clearly as possible that capitalism and imperialism are incompatible with human life, that a democratic and cooperative government of workers and the oppressed is necessary for all of us to live in harmony with each other in nature. Socialist Action itself is an independent political party. Our political line, our understanding of the world and our place in it, as well as our tactical program, is decided by the entirety of our membership at our annual convention. The independence of the Revolutionary Party is important, but that's not the same thing as abstentionism. Instead, we seek to be incredibly active in the mass struggles of working and oppressed peoples. We do not see any other way forward to build the mass revolutionary social struggle. Why should any worker join a revolutionary party if the revolutionary party ignores their concrete struggles right here, right now? When workers go on strike to resist a cut to their benefits and pension, we will support that struggle, even if that struggle is not a revolutionary struggle, but rather a struggle against further concessions to capitalism. When migrant workers demand a permanent pathway to residency in Canada, we will support that struggle, even though it's not a revolutionary struggle, but rather a democratic struggle. When women demand the right to choose, when Black and Indigenous and other racialized people resist police violence, when the houseless fight to protect their encampments, we support them. We support them in the streets with our bodies and energy, and we advance their demands wherever possible. To build a socialist revolution requires building solidarity between all segments of oppressed and exploited society. It requires walking and struggling together, shoulder to shoulder, side by side. And as revolutionary socialists, we cannot wait or demand reciprocity in the solidarity we extend to other groups, but rather we need to lead by example that only together shall we overcome. Abstentionism, or simply critiquing from the sidelines, does not build solidarity, but rather reinforces divisions among the ranks of the exploited and oppressed. So as I kind of start wrapping up here, about 5 minutes left, I want to spotlight one of the most important tools available in the revolutionary toolkit, one of the most important tools to building the mass revolutionary struggle and building the Revolutionary Party, and that is the United Front. Put simply, the United Front is a method of alliance building and of joining forces In a united front, you find socialists, anarchists, trade unionists, social democrats, and social justice organizers working together on a principled basis. But what does that mean? Well, it means Socialist Action, as a revolutionary party committed to the united front, that we will work with all other groups where we can agree on at least one demand. We don't need complete unity in action, but we need to be able to work where we can together to build the strongest movement that can win the confidence of the masses, because by working together, we're more likely to win reforms along the way. The United Front stands in contrast to abstentionism because it seeks to remove barriers to building a mass movement. Rather than requiring complete or near complete agreement in order to politically collaborate with others, we seek to work wherever it's possible. Again, wherever we can identify at least one demand, at least one principle where we agree. I want to share some practical examples about how the United Front in practice advances the overall class struggle. Socialist Action helped found the NDP Socialist Caucus over 20 years ago. And in doing so, we do not merely participate in the NDP, but we intervene in the NDP via the United Front. We work with left-wing social democrats, democratic socialists, and even other revolutionary socialists in the NDP to comprise the left-wing opposition to the right-wing bureaucratic leadership of the NDP. We often sum up our intervention in the NDP as 1% support and 99% criticism. But despite sometimes having to, hold our nose, we recognize as a labor party with organic connections to unions, we can't afford to ignore this arena in the class war. By working with others, we can present a coherent political and tactical program to the hundreds of thousands of workers in the NDP. By pushing the NDP to the left, we can generally shift the Overton window in Canada, which could also be described as raising political consciousness, while also building the mass struggle outside of the NDP. Another important example of the United Front is the Workers' Action Movement, which we also call WAM, which is a united front of union militants, anarchists, and revolutionary socialists in the labor movement. Socialist Action played a key role in revitalizing this united front in 2018. While some revolutionary socialist groups completely abstained from the unions by denouncing them as bureaucratic and class collaborationists, we instead take the opposite approach and run slates of candidates for the top leadership positions in the union. In 2021, WAM ran 3 people for the top 3 positions in the Ontario Federation of Labour, which is the largest labor organization in Ontario and represents 1 million unionized workers. Our candidate for president, Barry Conway, is a self-professed anarchist and union militant, and running alongside him was Sandra Griffith Bonaparte and myself. We're both Central Committee members from Socialist Action. This is a political collaboration that would be impossible without the United Front tactic. And by working together, our intervention in the 2021 OFL convention was that much stronger, where we advanced the principles of WAM, democratic unions, and militant job action to advance the struggle of workers. We forwarded a resolution of escalating job action up to and including a general strike to dump the Ford government. While some on the left attacked this demand as ultra-left, 44% of the delegates voted in favor. Even more vindication came 1 year later when the strike of OSBCU workers almost boiled over in a general strike. I'm just going to start wrapping up now, but just to share at this time, leadership in the revolutionary struggle can't be seized, but it needs to be earned. And earning the trust of the masses and exploited and oppressed peoples requires participation in all mass struggles and in always advancing principles and demands that improve the material conditions of workers and oppressed peoples. I often describe Socialist Action as my political home base, and I urge everybody to join a revolutionary party. Whichever revolutionary party you most agree with the political program, join that party. Because when one belongs to a revolutionary party, you participate in class conflict not as a single individual, but shoulder to shoulder with comrades united in a common political and tactical vision. And in an organization like Socialist Action that is committed to the United Front, our political unity is further expanded by working with as many people as possible. In that way, the mass struggle grows, we can debate our ideas, and we can advance collectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Our next speaker is Yvonne Hansen. Yvonne was driven to politics after growing frustrated with government inaction and the climate crisis. She has worked with activist groups like Extinction Rebellion, Our Time, and Force of Nature to advocate for more effective climate action. In the 1919 federal election, Yvonne ran as NDP candidate in Vancouver-Granville and played a key role in the 2022 electoral campaign of Vote Socialist Vancouver. She is a freelance photographer, and I might add here a very good one, and a leading member of Socialist Action. Welcome, Yvonne.
What a flattering introduction. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And it is good to be here. Hi, everybody. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about movement building and specifically how the left wastes time and energy in movement building and some sort of paths to navigate those pitfalls and how I think Socialist Action does that effectively. So, for some context of myself, I know we just talked a little bit about my bio, but I do want to give a little bit more context about why I have experience in this aspect of movement building. I've been organizing politically for about 10 years. I've been a member of over a dozen activist and socialist and environmentalist groups in that time, and with various degrees of dedication to them. And I've sat on many inaugural group meetings as well as presenting at many more. I've been a part of many student groups, startup groups, including the BC branch of Socialist Action, which was starting up, our time, and the Democratic Socialists of Vancouver, of which I am a founding member. Since 2015, we've had an election every year here in Vancouver, whether that be municipal or provincial or federal or otherwise, and I have volunteered in all of them. I stood as a candidate, as Elizabeth mentioned, and I've also recently had that experience of working with a team to set up a brand new electoral party in Vancouver, which was the Vote Socialist campaign. I've also worked as a union staffer and at one point a union organizer for BCGEU, which is BC's largest labor union. So all of this to say that I've seen the bureaucratic side of the leftist movement, I've seen the electoral side, the grassroots side, and everything in between. And I've seen a lot of different kinds of groups approach this issue of movement building from a lot of different directions and perspectives. And I am keen to share today what I have learned. So I'm going to talk about how we on the left spend our time and specifically how we waste it. I want to go over the three main ways that left-wing movements waste time and energy in movement building and how we can navigate these pitfalls. So these three ways, keep these in mind because they are the section titles of my speech here, are so the first is to have a base without a movement. And the second is to have a base and a movement without organization. And the last is to have all of these things, organization included, without leadership. Let's start with the first one, having a base without a movement. And I think Daniel also talked a little bit about this. So this happens when a group's goals are too broad or non-specific, something like end racism or tax the rich or stop climate change. One example of this that I have been part of was BC's Force of Nature. No offense, they were a great organization. And it was a nonprofit dedicated to supporting climate-friendly policies in municipal politics. Climate-friendly, it turns out, is very broad, like very broad. And it includes things like solar panels on buildings. Yes. Electrified vehicle fleets. Yes. But also rezoning. Yes. And walkability, reappropriation of car-based infrastructure, smaller, locally distributed grocers, waste processing plants, urban green space. The scope of the mission was so broadly defined that by the time it all fell apart, we were working on supporting a proposal to City Council to turn Vancouver's faux historical district of Gastown into a walkable shopping district, which is cool. It's a cool idea, but is it inspiring to activists? Not really. The momentum of the movement was so widely dispersed across such a broad range of only loosely connected projects that we wound up having only a handful of people working together on each project at a time, making the group seem a lot less full and energized than it otherwise might have been. And a big part of movement building is creating systems whereby the energy and excitement of the movement feeds back into itself, and that builds that momentum and helps maintain it. And when you can't see how many other people are working towards the same goal as you, and you don't have frequent opportunities to work, learn, and socialize with them, it's really easy to feel like you're fighting alone. If you have 10,000 people holding back a dam, it feels really important and empowering to be a part of that force. But when you're 3 people holding back a dam, suddenly it feels useless and futile, and maybe even embarrassing to be trying. So futility, as we know, is the death of movement building. So how do we navigate this issue? Well, narrowing the scope of our mission depending on the size of our membership. and not allowing scope creep or excessive granularity to distribute our forces too widely. Getting larger groups within the organization together frequently to touch base and essentially reiterate that there are many people working towards common goals. Likewise, teaming up with like-minded organizations regularly to accomplish common goals. In Socialist Action, I think we do a good job of this. We have a set of guiding principles and we have a series of branches that meet regularly. And we also have opportunities to get together in larger groups across the entire country, which reinforces our knowledge that we are working together. We subdivide into teams based on location, not usually based on projects, which ensures that our activities are clustered together and locally operated, and also locally relevant. But above all, we are well organized, which brings me to my next section. Did you like that segue? Which is covering the second pitfall of movement building, having a base and having a movement without organization. So this is like what Daniel mentioned. It is the classic Occupy Wall Street issue, right? It's when a group has a clear message and momentum and people to propel its activities, but has no method for structuring those activities and directing the movement's energies towards achievable short-term goals. The Occupy movement had plenty of long-term goals, but no real step-by-step process of how to get there. And in the end, it seemed just like a bunch of folks holding out until something changed, and regrettably nothing did. It's vital that a movement has organization internally. It has accountability structures and hierarchies of responsibility, not necessarily command structures that issue imperative decrees, but some form of centralized authority to guide the activities of members as needed, respond to disputes as needed and issues, and ensure that a code of conduct is adhered to. Socialist Action, of course, does a good job of this. We have strong internal organization for sure, and we have established bylaws and procedures for nearly every process, which I greatly appreciate, having been involved in some groups that don't. But I have watched this become a fatal sticking point in many other groups. In my experience, the main time waster here isn't working without organization, but when a new group trying to start up spends too much energy and time on crafting a brand new, perfect, foolproof organizational structure from scratch every single time someone has an idea for a campaign. We've learned from the Occupy movement's failures, but it seems like the pendulum can swing too far in the other direction. So instead of charging forward without a plan, socialists now have this tendency to become mired in the minutiae of organizational composition, a situation that becomes draining, uninspiring, repetitive, and frustrating very quickly. I'm not saying that this is never a worthy pursuit, and of course it is necessary, and I hold the comrades who do it successfully in high regard, and I myself have been involved in many an organizational crafting session around a dining room table. But when you have a cast of fresh, eager activists to work with instead of a team of well-seasoned socialist organizers, there's often a better way to acquire organizational structures. And that is to mobilize within other organizations. So sometimes it's necessary to start something new. When all other power structures in the area are entirely inhospitable to socialists, we must start from scratch. But when friendly organizations exist in the society around us, we will better serve the revolution by joining them and working through them. We do not need to build the power structures from scratch when we are welcome in those that already exist. Activist groups, nonprofits, organized labor, electoral parties at all levels of government, all of these provide opportunities for our cause. And every election, leadership campaign, party convention, union strike, or organized protest is an opportunity to install members and leaders who are informed by class struggle and who can make the organization an even more hospitable environment for other like-minded comrades. A great way to attract members of a certain ilk is for leadership to demonstrate obvious sympathies. This is the strategy behind much of the work that we do as active socialists and as Socialist Action. We treat this organization, Socialist Action, as a nexus point and encourage our membership to work towards leadership positions in various other social and political organizations. This includes members who have become leaders in the labor movement and in some of Canada's largest unions. And it includes members who have run for political office, myself included, of which there are many more. It also includes members who work together with environmentalist, anti-colonialist, anti-racist, and anti-war movements in their respective cities to ensure that the conversations within those organizations include a socialist perspective and that socialist action as a whole stays informed about what these organizations are doing so that we may assist in numbers, in research, and to share the workload however possible. We have the Socialist Caucus within the NDP, and I think this is a pretty direct example of how we can use existing organizational structures to advance our movement. We use the mechanism of the New Democratic Party to organize socialists, and we then use that association to push for changes within the larger party apparatus. We install leaders in various branches, and we use those organizational structures to advance the socialist caucuses, socialist causes and principles. Well, socialist caucuses as well as the in just the BC branch alone, we have members in the labor movement, in other socialist causes, in various electoral policies and caucuses, and environmentalist associations. And all of them, all of us, are working together to bring the activities of these groups closer to our goals as socialist revolutionaries. It's a winning strategy, and it's one that Socialist Action does well. But there is another important piece to this strategy that I have not talked about yet. And that brings me to my last piece here on the topic of how time can be wasted in movement building, and that is having an organization without leadership. So simply having socialists installed in various movements and organizations doesn't directly benefit our revolutionary efforts in any major way. It's useful to have folks reporting back to Socialist Action about what other groups are doing and how we can help, when demonstrations are happening, etc. But to actually affect change within these groups, we need more than just eager activists. For that, we need leaders. There is much talk in the labor movement about creating and training leaders. Anyone who's been to a Jane McCalvary conference is very familiar with this concept, I'm sure, and I'm sure many of the viewers have been, knowing the audience. But in many casual circles, there seems to be a misunderstanding about what leadership actually is. Leading is not just telling people what to do, obviously, but it's also not just about showing people what to do and doing it with them. Leading is about getting people excited to act and about inspiring them to work towards a common goal. It's about showing people that our goal is in their best interests and indeed in the best interests of all working class people. People will always work harder when it's done to benefit themselves. And I think that's just natural. And so in socialism, leaders are people who help others see how working towards a socialist revolution benefits themselves. So to train leaders to do this, we have educationals and discussions like the one we're having today. And we also have opportunities for new members to come in and learn and ask questions. And all of these are fundamental aspects of building our movement. We have a lot of great leaders in Socialist Action and a lot of opportunities to train new leaders to enact change in their own communities. But on the other side of this, we have a similar pitfall to that of organizational structuring. If a group becomes too consumed with the process of finding, training, and distributing leaders, it is easy to spin wheels and waste time. I have seen this happen. In an environmentalist activist group that I was once a part of, I will not name it because I don't want to throw them under the bus, but a few of the decision makers in that group got it in their heads that the most efficient way to build a movement would be to train everyone in the group to be a leader. And we had seminars and workshops and practice breakout groups and training sessions and rehearsals, so much. And so much of that entire focus of the group became preparing membership for leadership. And of course, everyone burnt out because it didn't feel immediately relevant and meaningful like the idea of fighting climate change should. It felt like the first step in a long and convoluted process that we were being told to trust, and we were promised it would eventually wind its way back to fighting for climate change or fighting against climate change. But I dropped out before it did, as did many others. What's more, installing a leader in an organization from scratch, even if they have had all the training and if Jane McCalvary herself would give them a gold star, it's a process that may take years depending on the structure of the organization. And there's no guarantee that that effort wouldn't be wasted if the organization proves impenetrable. And unfortunately, the stronger and more entrenched the internal organizational structure of a group is, the harder it is to install a leader when starting completely from scratch. We saw a pretty stark example of this recently here in BC when party newcomer Angelia Paduai attempted to run for BC NDP leadership against the entrenched authority of MLA David Eby. Anjali is a fantastic natural-born leader, and everyone who has met her or heard her speak would agree. She was able to motivate this campaign of activists and fellow leaders, and drew widespread support from across the province. But in the end, the organizational structure of the party was too impenetrable to outsiders. There was no way for her to win because she was disqualified from the running and simply not allowed to stand for election. So how do we avoid getting mired in training and leadership building, or in the gradual process of having one of our members work their way up the command structure of an ideologically adjacent organization, only to feel the disappointment of having a fantastic leader attempt to jump into a leadership role within an organization and be rejected for being too much of an outsider? We do exactly what we do with organizational structure. We use what is already in place. This is where recruitment comes into the machinations of our revolutionary socialist agenda. We identify strong leaders in other organizations and we recruit them. We aim to recruit those who are already poised to climb the leadership structures or who have already done so successfully. And this should be the first thing that we do when approaching a friendly or ideologically adjacent, at the very least, organization. This is at the vanguard of movement building. This is building the vanguard. Successful movement building starts with recruiting leaders. And if that fails, we train and install leaders in existing organizations. And if that fails, we join other organizations at the ground level. And if that fails, we build our own organizational structures from scratch based on campaigns or associations of people. And as I understand it, this is the flowchart for building movements and avoiding pitfalls wherever possible. So I will talk briefly about recruiting leaders, and then I'll wrap up my presentation. I myself was recruited to Socialist Action as an NDP candidate, and I've seen many friends here in Socialist Action be recruited from other electoral campaigns and activist groups in a similar way. This is a highly effective system when it is possible, and I think a very important piece of this is ensuring that leaders are not made to feel like they must sacrifice their position or influence in other organizations in order to join Socialist Action. Another important part of recruiting leaders into Socialist Action is demonstrating that we can add value to their efforts in their respective organizations. As Socialist Action, we have a lot of value to add, and I believe this sincerely. We can support our leaders by offering people power and boots on the ground during demonstrations, rallies, worker strikes, etc. Our members can offer financial help to socialist electoral campaigns, as well as volunteer services that we all know are desperately needed. We can also provide research and knowledge-based services. We have a vast array of extremely knowledgeable members among our ranks. And finally, we can provide a support system of like-minded individuals with social benefits that should not be undervalued. The social effect of having a bunch of people around you who are all working towards the same goal and facing the same struggles in their respective positions in their community is incredibly valuable. I think we have a long way to go before we can say that we have built a successful revolutionary movement. I think that'll be after the revolution has happened that we can look back and say that. But I do think that we are on the right track and we are making the right moves. And in this presentation, I've gone over some of the primary pitfalls of building mass movements. I've provided examples of other groups that have fallen into them. And I've shared some of the theoretical and practical approaches that we as Socialist Action use to navigate them. I expect that in the coming years, we'll see Socialist Action continue with these activities of recruiting leaders, working from within organizations, supporting campaigns of all kinds, and growing our numbers in turn. I want to thank you guys all for listening today. I hope that this presentation was interesting, and I really hope that you enjoyed the other presentations at today's educational. Thank you for listening. Take care.
Thank you, Yvonne. Our next speaker is Chris Zawasaki. He works in fire and rescue as a firefighter, first responder, and was a disability support worker. He got post-secondary training in computer programming. Chris is a chief steward in CUPE, Local 1099 in Vegreville, Alberta. He is a member of the Workers' Action Movement, the NDP Socialist Caucus, and is on the Central Committee of Socialist Action. Welcome, Chris.
Hello, and Good day to everybody. Sorry, my lighting is terrible at this time of day in my house with two lights. I'd like to thank, first off, everyone who put on this educational conference, and also to everyone here taking part and listening in. So I'd like to start by talking about like how building a mass movement is, I found when I was kind of looking more into this, is a very expansive topic. And when it comes to forming, getting involved, supporting, and taking actions within, there wouldn't be enough time. It would have to almost be a full day course to really delve fully into all the information and tactics that can be used. So I'll be taking a fairly simplistic approach, more or less brief, basic introduction. Especially with today's political and social issues, we're seeing more and more revolutionary and reactionary type people, both locally and internationally, who are seeking to make a difference towards living in an equal, just society and want to make changes for the better. They want to have a chance of avoiding the multiple and converging crises we face. So you want to make a stand, you want to speak out against the injustices, you want to stand by allies. What do you do and where do you start? Whether you're looking to start something from the ground up if you need to, or if you're able to join or form a united front with an existing group who's aligned with your ideology and causes. No matter what route is taken, you always have to remember the three main options for that change within the group. It's organization, advocacy, and mobilization. All three, organization, advocacy, and mobilization, are just as important and in need of constant focus. If we break them down a little bit of their purpose, so with organizing, I looked up a few of the definitions, and the most average for what we're talking about in this sense is coordinating human efforts, arranging resources, and incorporates those two in such a way that it helps achieve the achievement of your objectives. It involves deciding the ways and means of which the plans can be implemented. Organization places the agency for success with a continual expanding base of ordinary people who may have never previously had any sort of involvement and who would never have considered themselves an activist at all. That's the point of organizing. Organizing is about the relationships and building meaningful solidarity amongst people. Advocacy, which Webster's described as the act or process of supporting a cause or proposal. Or another description would be advocacy means getting support from another person or persons to help you express your views, wishes, and help you stand up for yours and other people's rights, or a conjecture of both, like when it deals, with different value systems or value systems that need to get changed due to the issues that have come up over the years, or changes with how things are viewed, or changes that should have never taken place in the first place. So you need to be on the lookout for like-minded people in your local sphere, which is very important. We talk with many people daily, from family, friends, co-workers, even strangers. With the internet age, I know Facebook, a lot of people, they're friends on Facebook. For the most part, 2,000 friends, I'd say, that I'd put under the stranger category. But, these are all people that, you're constantly talking to and networking with. And you'd be surprised at how many of the people have the same thoughts that you're having. And there are, a portion that are reluctant and maybe even afraid to stand up for any number of reasons. But when they see they have supportive allies, they will stand together. When we get onto mobilizing, Webster, again, I went the basic corporate route, defines mobilizing as to put into movement or circulation. Wikipedia, I kind of liked their definition of mass mobilizing, which is social mobilizing, seeking to facilitate change through a range of players engaged in interrelated and complementary efforts. The process usually takes the form of large public gatherings, such as mass meetings, marches, parades, processions, and demonstrations. An important factor when it comes to mobilizing is seeking out allies and being a united front. Finding people, even of other groups who share your cause, ideas, and goals, is a great way to grow the numbers and to show strength with a diverse and inclusive group of people. It should be remembered that mobilization lets people self-select the level of activism that they want to do. Organizers are the ones who seek out, cultivate, and transform people's interests. However, with that said, you still, whether it's an existing group or it's something that you feel that you want to start up on your own, you need to have a foundation formed. As with all things, you need to start somewhere. You need to form the foundation on which to expand and to get things done. To keep things simple, start with a few basic core processes. For any organization, there needs to be a structure of leadership, communication channels, and methods of achieving tasks and obtainable goals. The key is to having a coherent, organized group. Having a strong core reflects your goals and visions. Your activism that comes from your ideology will be what others see and what will continue to bring other like-minded people into your fold. But you need to have those strong roots. This is, however, not saying that you don't expand over time. However, you still need to maintain your core foundation. It's important not to focus particularly on long-term goals, but rather to look at the next step or processes. It doesn't mean that you can't have long-term goals. However, focusing on the steps that you have in the short term and celebrating the victories as they pile up, and as those are occurring, you will slowly work towards larger goals, which will come into view, and you will achieve them a little more. I didn't quite have the words how I wanted to say, but it's a little bit more like the baby steps, and you're always moving forward. And also, it helps to avoid any catastrophic errors. Nowadays, we have technology to help keep contacts, plan events, hold meetings, and just basic communications with each other. With today's technology, we also have access to numerous sites and platforms to find others and network with allies from all over the world, even, and keep them informed on what's going on in our areas. Be active, have regular meetings, get together, plan projects, and consistently be seeking out other allies, both individual and group. Solidarity, mass organization, and a united front gets noticed. It gets people aware and gets them thinking. A few extra points that are just kind of a broad spectrum is presenting a united front. Differences of opinion and debating are great things. Being open to new opinions and views and stances on things is how we all learn and grow. However, you need to be united when you present to the public. You stand by your fellow comrade when you're out there. You have time behind closed doors within your, I guess, fold, for lack of a better term, to debate actions and things. You don't want to be arguing or debating tactics and stances, and not having that united front. You also need to be aware of the actions and comments from within, especially because it affects everyone, and there's no place for toxic behavior. So you need to be proactive in preventing corruptive, harmful actions, behaviors on other people, or this can spiral out of control quickly and cause great harm to others within your organization and even to your organization and actions themselves. You need to also be realistic and be prepared for setbacks. You'll have great victories and you'll make a difference, but there will be struggles. Use them to learn, not to bash or look down upon the actions. Don't focus, however, on them. Take the positives that you gained and learn from it and use them in creating areas of improvement and working and seeking solutions to move forward. Take the time to celebrate the victories, no matter the size. As the time goes by, you'll grow, you'll make a difference, and you will notice the difference that you and the movement will make. building mass movements is about getting people organized, mobilizing, and advocating. Getting out there, standing up, getting noticed, and making changes. With every step forward, you gain more and more like-minded people and groups that will help gain greater numbers within, which causes, as it says, like a mass movement, right? And when you're focusing on, I guess, the way for causes and that, we all might have disagreements on small things, but fundamentally, we're here for the same goals, the same things we're standing for, you know, with workers' rights, human rights, you know, the battle against what capitalism has done and is doing to the people. So, you know, we need with mass organization to focus on those. Now, I know I might be a little biased on the subject, but I do think, especially for those who are in Canada and wanting to know and look for others that are seeking to either get their start, get their foot wet, seek information, even help out, or even jump all in. Socialist Action is a great place with great comrades that will help. You know, if you're facing areas that you want to learn more on, like myself, I'm learning tons of things all the time. You've got comrades to help stand by you, to support you, and one of the big things with mass organization and the we keep going, and we keep getting noticed more and more, and it's our personal growth. It's the personal growths with everyone involved. So I know this was a little bit short, but when I started going down the rabbit hole of all the different processes and that, like Yvonne touched on stuff, Daniel did. Yeah, I figured this would be the best way. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, so now we're going to go to Dave, our technical producer, and we will take 3 questions. You will read them aloud, and they're also in the chat. We will then go to the panel, and they will have 5 minutes each to answer 1, 2, or 3 questions. We'll start with Daniel, then Chris, then Yvonne. Dave?
Yep, the first question comes from Judy Kosh. Many revolutionary parties have youth movements because youth have their own problems. Could you comment on this? The second question comes from Julius A. Socialist Action is a growing organization. What is the best way for people who are interested in the ideas conveyed in this conference to get involved with SA? The third question comes from Elizabeth Weiss. Someone once described the United Front as an instance of strike together but march separately. What does this mean in practice?
Okay, you have 5 minutes, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. Yvonne, Chris, love both your talks. Judy's question is true. A lot of revolutionary parties do have youth movements. And I think it's for 2 reasons. One, youth problems, unique situations going on. And actually, second as well, it captures the social part of socialism. You know, youth are, you know, looking for opportunities not just to advance their struggles and their needs, but also to develop connections with other people and to work on collective endeavors. And so in Socialist Action, we also have, in the past, you know, had a youth wing. These days, it's more of a student organizing wing, which is not entirely the same thing, but it tries to capture a similar role. Student issues are, you know, kind of a unique subset of issues under capitalism. You're not exactly a worker. Most students will become workers after they finish their studies. But the corporate university is a kind of a arena of mass struggle, and so we are in the process of building up our capacity to organize on campuses. And as part of Socialist Action, I helped initiate another United Front. I guess it was in 2020. Not entirely sure. Memory's a bit foggy for me these days, especially in the context of the pandemic. But it was called Students Mobilizing Against Systemic Hardship, SMASH. We started with the acronym and we worked backwards to force something into the acronym. And it's still active. We just are, you know, hosting, you know, reading groups, trying to, again, maintain that social space that they're looking for, while also talking about socialist ideas and theories, while also trying to connect it to our broader mass struggle on the streets, in the workplace, etc. And so we've been participating with protests on campus and also hosting educationals. Elizabeth's question on the United Front is great. Strike together, march separately. And this is the idea with having an independent revolutionary party as well as a broader united front. The broader united front, by virtue of having more groups involved, more perspectives involved, more people, more energy, more capacity, is going to be more effective at achieving any singular demand that all the groups can agree on. You're more likely to win. And that's important. Victories are important for fueling a movement. The reforms win further galvanizes the working and oppressed classes to take even more, to take the next steps. But one thing that's important in all of this is political independence for each of the groups involved. And that's the perfect compromise. Some groups don't want to work with other people if they don't agree on everything. And I find that bunk because of the United Front approach to that problem. If you can strike together but march separately, then you don't have to worry about conflating your politics with another group. The United Front makes it very clear that we have one common vision for why we're here, but beyond that, we're individual groups. In the Municipal Socialist Alliance, which is our electoral United Front in Ontario, we work with a bunch of people that have a bunch of different perspectives that Socialist Action does not hold. But none of those other perspectives where we don't agree are part of our basis for working together. So in that way, we can maintain our own political independence, we can advance our own ideas, and yet still participate in the broader struggle, which is going to make much bigger gains on our agreed upon, demands. So yeah, the United Front really is an important one. The only aversion people have to it is what I think is very toxic association politics, where even marching with someone but separately somehow is a reflection on your own politics, when that's just, you work with people, your family, your friends, there's tons of people that have different perspectives than you, and yet you can separate yourself from them. And that's exactly what the United Front allows you to do.
Thank you, Daniel. Chris?
Yes, thank you. So for Judy, the way for your question, I think one of the core things is again with like the United Front type action and system with youth movements, those who aren't involved, it's lending the support. It's because the youth are going to be the ones, when I'm old and hopefully not too unable to do a lot, that will be taking my place. They'll be the ones who continue making the difference and the changes. And I think it's a support, it's a unity, and they can look for guidance for those who have a bit more experience or maybe knowledge. But we have to also be aware that if we might not realize the same issues that they're facing due to where we are, but all in all, I think it's about unity. But Julius, for seeking people for getting involved, I think SA here has like pretty much a really good system. There's the podcast, there's website information, there's getting out into the public, there's just being active and expressing your views and letting people know that we're around, this is our stances, and inviting people. That's one of the core things, is just letting people know this is what we're about, this is where you find us, this is what we're doing. For Elizabeth, Daniel pretty much summed up pretty much everything I could say on that, so thank you.
Yvonne?
Oops. Oh, put my tape back over my screen. Okay, so yeah, many revolutionary parties have youth movements. I 100% do see that youth have their own problems, and having been in many youth movements myself, I can absolutely see why this is necessary. It's similar to how, other, like, not necessarily saying that youth in particular are more marginalized or like comparably marginalized, but young people just have it worse. Like, I'm sorry to say, especially in this economy, a lot of younger people haven't had the benefit of ever having some kind of like cushy bed underneath them to fall back on. And so having these youth movements, it's not just like advancing causes that are specific to young people, but it's having groups of like-minded individuals who have been through similar struggles to sort of relate to in a social sense, as well as a movement building capacity. Julius A says, Socialist Action is a growing organization. What's the best way to connect? Well, I can't speak for everybody, but I can say in BC, you can reach out to myself or Mark Lister or Gary Porter or any of our fantastic members. You can find me on Facebook, you can find me on YouTube and Instagram, blah, 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 or you can send us an email and we would be happy to introduce you to the team. We go out and do many protests and demonstrations, and we try to hand out literature as often as possible. And you'll almost certainly see one of our members volunteering on an election campaign near you. So if you are interested in joining the BC branch, which you should, we get up to some fun stuff. Yeah, leave a comment or whatever, and we'll get you. And also the Socialist Action website, of course, as I'm sure has been mentioned. And for the last item, which is talking about the United Front, I think I'm going to defer that to some of our other.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go back to the producer for 3 more questions. Go ahead, Dave.
The first question comes from Robert McDiarmid. The Popular Front alliance with the progressive bourgeoisie is probably dominant amongst progressives. Can you compare and contrast Popular versus United Front? The second question comes from Tom Baker. Is building a revolutionary party a linear, gradual process, or should we expect to grow the party through fusion/splits and explosive growth? The third question comes from Wally Abro. On building solidarity, could you touch on how to reconcile extending solidarity to groups who, once liberated, might have views adversarial to other groups, for example, Muslims/Palestinians to LGBTQ folks?
Okay, so you each have 5 minutes. We're going to start with Yvonne, then Daniel, then Chris. Yvonne?
Again, for the United Front question, I'm going to defer that. But for Tom Baker's question, is building a revolutionary party a linear, gradual process? It's hard to say. I'd like to say it's not so much about fusions and splits and explosive growth as described, but it's definitely not necessarily just like an upward trajectory. You know, there's always going to be bumps along the way, and there's times when growth will shoot up and there's times when it will remain stagnant. And I think that's just the nature of organizing with people. Like, we see the same patterns in anything, like in the economy or in algorithms on social media. We see these patterns of like activity that waver. And I think that we just need to kind of hold on to that knowledge when we are expecting or when we're anticipating levels of growth for the revolutionary movement. On building solidarity, sorry, I'm just reading these questions. Could you touch on how to reconcile extending solidarity to groups who, once liberated, might have views adversarial to other groups? That is extremely tricky. And it is something that groups that I have been a board member of have struggled with. We've had issues of sort of reconciling tactics and the way that certain activist groups or anarchist groups are a great example, approach politics and political activism with how the revolutionary movements approach these items. Like, it is extremely difficult. I think my main piece of advice there would be to prevent gatekeeping, like not looking at who's socialist enough, and to also have this sort of plurality of understanding about what socialism actually is and how it can mean different things to different people, and just being like tolerant and cognizant of that when we're building our revolutionary movements.
Okay. Daniel?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. So I'll start off with the difference between a popular and a united front. And like you already described in the question, Bob, the Popular Front is going to be a broader alliance that includes elements that are indeed part of the very system that a united front would be targeting. You know, the Popular Front, if it's going to be allied with the progressive elements of the bourgeoisie, and you know, you see that forward in different ways. The Democratic Party is probably an example even then of a popular front when you consider that there are democratic socialists in there, and then you also have these billionaires in the same party that are trying to represent some sort of enlightened capitalism. And that's the trap with a popular front. It might be tempting to immediately adopt or join a popular front because the appearance of more people seems like you're closer to your goal, but it just ends up getting murky, and it's not class independent is going to be the big thing. A united front, at least for me, a united front that we're building on the left is going to be class independent at minimum. It's not going to be comprised of any elements of the bourgeoisie, because fundamentally with a class perspective, we don't have the same needs. We don't have the same goals. We can't have the same goals. Capitalism is a zero-sum game. What's good for the capitalist is bad for the worker, and vice versa. And even if you have some capitalists that want to use a softer hand, we have to recognize that that's meant to be a misdirection. And to refer back to the Mouseland poem that Josh read earlier, that's the difference between the black and the white cats. We don't want any cats on our mouse party. So that's kind of the difference there. And the other thing I want to mention as well is we need to be very cognizant about any sort of red-brown alliance. So embracing or working with any reactionary elements on the far right, who in some ways could also be quite anti-authoritarian. Think about the anti-mandate convoy in Canada, which is definitely kind of led by a reactionary petty bourgeoisie element. And you had some people on the left that were actually, like, oh, these people are anti-authoritarian, they're rising up against the state, we should work with them. But that is an alliance that doesn't have a clear basis at all, and it replaces anti-authoritarianism in some vague sense for actually building working class and oppressed people's power. Because again, as a reactionary movement, it wasn't very coherent in exactly who it was advancing at whose expense. And to tackle Tom's question a bit about building a revolutionary party, I mean, so far, at least in my 3.5 years, I would say it's been a linear, gradual process. But even with evolution, and I talk about like evolutionary, like biology, you see, long periods of gradual, and then very quickly you can see very dramatic changes as conditions ripen. And I think that could take the form of fusions at some point. As the class conflict heats up, I think a lot of the disagreements between groups will start to get resolved as more of our ideas get to be put into practice. In our current state of relatively low class consciousness and relatively low amounts of class conflict, a lot of our ideas remain abstract because we haven't had an opportunity to put them into practice. The first time we get a general strike going off the ground, we'll be able to put to bed the question of whether a general strike is a viable tactic or, is it ultra left, But for the time being, a lot of these conversations are just hypothetical, abstract, and you just get academic conversations rather than practical conversations about how to best move the movement. And so, yeah, I do imagine at some point there's going to be bigger growth, and then depending on how that goes, yeah, maybe we take some steps back too. And just to touch on Wally's question as well, I think the main thing to recognize is where we're situated as a revolutionary group. We're situated in Canada. And so when you talk about, let's say, Palestinian or other oppressed groups around the world, oppressed nations around the world, we extend critical support to all oppressed and beleaguered nations around the world. And that includes nations like Iran. That could be, the leadership and the government in charge in Iran is incredibly regressive. But at the same time, as a nation itself is also being oppressed by the United States and NATO. And so you have this dual nature for a lot of oppressed nations around the world. They're a prison house of nations. They oppress their own, queer and women, and, you have different racial hierarchies and whatnot. And yet at the same time, they're a client state or oppressed and caught in a debt trap of the Americans' making. And so in the struggle between Iran and America, we need to stand with the oppressed nation and be critically supportive, while also at the same time providing no political support for their leading powers. And so I think that's the best way to answer your question in terms of the adversarial. I mean, ultimately, our vision is we have more in common than apart, and our liberation is a shared liberation. And so I think that's the best counter argument to put to that. But yeah, there's some mess involved in building the mass movement.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just reading the questions because my phone decided it didn't want to cooperate. Population frontline address. Yeah, see, Daniel's explanation from I'm very not too familiar with even looking into the Popular Front aspect. I've always kind of liked and been biased to, you know, a united front. You know, we stand together, even though we might have our own goals and so I can't really, sorry, unfortunately, speak to that. Building a revolutionary party. I think Daniel's right in where we're going to see growth that, you know, there's peaks, valleys, and kind of plateaus, but I think the more and more people are seeing the corrupt system and the injustices done nowadays, you know, like things have been horrible for a long time, but it just, the defense of it now is getting to where I think we're going to, over for foreseeable future, see more and more growth and quicker growth as people are getting more and more fed up with it, and the old kind of adages, unfortunately, of where people's kind of attitude of that, well, it didn't affect me, so, well, it's not my problem. Well, it is becoming their problem, and there's no way about that the capitalist agenda is just a monster. The last question. So dirty. That's a. I would have to think a little bit longer on that one. That's a pretty, to me anyway, it's a pretty intense question. So I will pass for this time on it. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, so we will now go back for round 3. Dave?
Yeah, the first question comes from Barry Weisletter. Presently, pro-NATO, pro-war spending does not draw big protest. Yet we remember mass protests against the US war in Iraq, and we do know that support for the Palestinian people is greater than ever globally. How can we build a bigger anti-war movement? Second question comes from Josh Floyd. I have several times been called incorrect terms when recruiting or campaigning. His question is, how should the revolutionary left most effectively handle misinformation-based criticism when building support? The third question is, why do you think many groups on the left tend to shy away from working with other groups with whom they have some disagreements?
Okay, so you each have 5 minutes again. I'm going to start with Daniel, then Chris, and then Yvonne. Daniel?
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. So first, building on Barry's question, how do we build a bigger anti-war movement? And you're right. I mean, if you think back to the 60s, which again, I wasn't around for, but I know you were, Barry, the anti-Vietnam War protests, I mean, it was massive in North America. In fact, I remember being quite fascinated with this Wikipedia article about all the self-immolation that was going on in the United States, of setting themselves literally on fire to protest the American invasion of Vietnam. And to think that, you know, these days we so uncritically accept the myth that Canada and America and somehow the military is a lesser evil than actually beginning to dismantle our own military apparatus, which in reality is the biggest military structure that's ever existed in the history of the world and remains the biggest threat to life on this planet. It really does seem like a contradiction. How do we revive that legacy of the anti-war movement? And there are some, I think, challenges in this, more and more over time. The wars and some is taking the form of proxy wars. That's what we see in Ukraine and Russia. We get to hide behind the fact that technically we're not at war. So there needs to be a lot of effort to educate people about exactly the extent and the scope of the Canadian military and what it does. And that plays no progressive role whatsoever. I mean, the Canadian military gets touted as a peacekeeping military. There's only 50 of our troops are involved in peacekeeping missions, while tens of thousands are involved in deliberately provocative and expansionist missions around the world. We're trying to bring back that energy to the students on campus. I think, again, the youth is going to be a big place to build this, as long as we can make the point very clearly that anti-militarism is just as important as the struggle against climate change, because in fact, tourism and the climate catastrophe are linked in a lot of ways, and connecting the anti-imperialist struggle to other struggles is going to be very important. And then in the few cases where there is very popular resistance to militarism, like Palestine, we need to build on that and again connect it to the other struggles. You know, the war that's going on in Yemen, the blockade of Cuba, the efforts to undermine Venezuelan self-determination. I mean, there's a lot of examples to draw upon, and we really need to tease apart those intersections. For Josh's question about, you know, how do you handle misinformation-based criticism when building support? Very important question. And I think the first thing we need to do is recognize that there has been a lot of propaganda, anti-red propaganda, anti-communist propaganda. And so recognize that people's concerns are legitimate, at least. You know, if someone, you know, starts talking about like, well, isn't communism just authoritarianism? Aren't they going to take away my stuff? First, recognize that they're willing to have a conversation with you by asking that question. And to say, yeah, I get that concern. A lot of people have been saying it. And then, you know, after you at least start off with a basis of listening, I think people are going to be more receptive to understanding your point of view. And, you know, if you have multiple opportunities to speak with them, you can build on it. And I think ultimately with socialism, bringing it back to we're fighting for the many, you know, the worker, you know, the idea of the working person as someone that contributes so much to the world. You know, nothing in the world could be done without workers, yet there's at least say over how things are done. There's a few key arguments, I think, that are very sympathetic to most people. I think most people are quite weary of capitalists and corporate domination. They just don't see a way forward, and they've been made to fear the unknown of the socialist project more than the comfort of capitalist decay. And I think that's, you know, a place to, you know, recognize and try and find the, you know, the bedrock, you know, find out what they're most upset about today, and to connect that idea to capitalism, because invariably most of people's biggest concerns today are related directly to the profit motive that is starving the masses of food, water, shelter, while just making the handful of people obscenely rich. So I'll end there.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Chris?
Oh, sorry, muted. Yeah. So for the for Barry's question, I think from a little bit of with what I'm talking about, and maybe this is more of a Albertan perspective, but because there is a lot of actual Ukrainian base here, but for some reason, I think it's because there isn't that involvement with Canada, or well, people don't understand with NATO and Western government, you know, what can actually result with all of these things. The blame, it's become just the blame game where people aren't associating it though with like an actual tragic war. It's just, oh yeah, there's that war going on. Yeah, this group, that group, you know, and the issues. Whereas with Vietnam and stuff, with the big 60s thing, they see, you know, it's you're involved. You see, you know, friends, family going off, and I think it's a little bit of a game that the Western government plays with that, by in a way knowing that there's no direct involvement that we're really in. And I hope that's making sense how I'm explaining it. That's kind of the best way, the way I kind of see it going, is it's that disconnect. For Josh, I think with the misinformation, it comes down to it's honesty, being forward, but yet open to actual discussion and explaining things, and on the odd time, you know, where none of us are perfect, if a mistake is ever made, it's owned up to, and it's like this, yep, that was, you know, something that might have was an error. But we also, I think, explaining what the whole premise behind what we're standing for and how we plan to go about doing things, because there is that people get quite biased, and the right has been really good for kind of throwing that, well, the left, they want, the Stalinist Russia gulag system. Well, no, that's not true. And getting that information out, I think, will help a lot with that. But open, honest conversation. And thirdly, I think sometimes groups can get almost focused on their one goal or struggle, and at times maybe it's a little bit of a disconnect between how, as people, we're all people. All these things are affecting all of us, and it just comes, it's just a process of something that we got to work on until we can get, fully united against all of the struggles and issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Yvonne?
Yeah. So for Barry's question, it is a pretty tough situation because people are flooded by catastrophic events and systems and news items on a daily basis. So it's easy to feel really overwhelmed by it and not sure which direction to act in. So I don't have any good solutions, but I do think that it's important that we advance our socialist goals as part of a package deal. So we have a socialist movement that is anti-war, but it also responds to many of the other catastrophic items in the news at the same time, right? So people don't have to be part of an anti-war movement, an anti-racism movement, anti-climate change movement, pro-choice, pro-LGBT, all of these different things that are really already wrapped up in socialism. They can just be part of a socialist movement and feed all the birds with one scone. For the next question, which is about how to counter misinformation-based criticism, this is also super tricky, but I did hear a really good piece of advice once, and that is to repeat somebody's position back to them and see if they agree with it before you counter it. And if they don't agree with what you have stated their position to be, then it is really important to give them an opportunity to correct it, and then you can respond to that. I feel like 90% of disagreements that I see online stem from one party or the other not doing this. And they proceed to argue about what the other believes rather than why they believe that. And we'll hear statements from right-wingers like, oh, communists believe that everybody should just be assigned their job and nobody gets to pick what they do with their life and everybody has to dress the same and eat the same things. And then we as Marxists go, no, we don't. And the best thing we can do in that situation is ask them, well, why do you believe that? Like, why do you think we want those things? What has led you to that conclusion? Let's counter that. And then go from there. And asking questions rather than arguing with responses is honestly the best way to turn an argument into a discussion and make it a teaching opportunity and a learning opportunity as well. And then the last piece, which is why do many groups on the left tend to away from working with other groups with whom they have disagreements? I have a rich history of experience with this topic. It's very frustrating. And in my experience, the issue has been gatekeeping. So I mentioned this before, but there's this problem of like, what is socialist enough? What does socialism mean? Who is socialist enough to work with? And combating this kind of plurality of understanding on the left about what socialism is. There's some people out there who call themselves Marxists who would not agree that democratic socialism is socialist. There's some people out there who are Leninists who would not believe that Trotsky is, you know what I mean? Like, so it's this also, there's this inability to hone in on common goals. So when we're working with an environmentalist group who doesn't explicitly call themselves socialists, and maybe they don't even believe in unionizing or whatever, but they believe in combating climate change, like we need to be able to hone in on that goal sincerely and just kind of like block out everything that they say about electric cars and whatever, and work together. A wise cat once said, we do have a lot in common: the same earth, the same air, the same sky. And maybe if we started looking at what's the same instead of what's different, well, who knows? And that cat was Meow from the 1998 Pokemon movie, but I really wanted to share that quote. Anyway, yeah.
Thank you, Yvonne. Okay, so we're going to go back to our producer for the last round of questioning, and you will each have up to 5 minutes. We'll start with Yvonne first and then Daniel. And after that, you will be given 3 minutes if you wish to after we finish the questions for a summary. Okay, Dave?
Yeah, the first question comes from Stephen Crozier. We likely pretty much agree that Socialist Action does a good job building a mass revolutionary movement. That's why we're here. However, is there something that you could suggest that we could be doing better? The second question is it possible to achieve socialism without a revolutionary party, as happened in Chile in the 1970s and 1980s in Nicaragua? The third question is, what do you think of radical parties such as the Black Panthers in the US?
Okay, each have 5 minutes to answer 1, 2, or 3. Yvonne, Chris, and Daniel. Yvonne?
Yeah, so I'm going to admit my socialist history, it's not my strong suit. So I'm just going to leave those last 2 questions untouched, and I'll respond to Stephen's question, which is SA does a pretty good job building a revolutionary movement, but is there something we could suggest doing better? This feels like a trap, but I do think that we could improve our abilities to connect with other groups and be more welcoming and mindful of other people's sort of versions of what socialism is. You know, there's like that whole joke that's like, oh, what do you call one socialist? A faction. What do you call 2 socialists? A split. And that is so true. And it's really unfortunate. And in a lot of cases, there's groups that we don't associate with that I don't understand enough socialist theory to know why we don't, and to understand that. And I feel like maybe that's an area where we can kind of fix that. And then also being more open to working with a diverse range of electoral parties. I think that there's a lot of electoral parties with people who would call themselves socialists, and just because we don't define them as such doesn't mean that they are not valid in their identity as socialists in their own right. And it also doesn't mean that they don't have valid things to contribute to the revolution, because that's what it's all about. It's not about whether or not I believe X person is socialist enough. It's about whether or not they're willing to like make phone calls or do a donation pitch to get the revolution kind of going. So yeah.
Thanks, Yvonne. Chris?
Okay. So for Stephen, I mean, there's always room for improvement, you know, with everything. At least that's how I look at things. You know, there's always learning experiences and you know, progression to be made. So I mean, I think SA does a great job. Again, probably biased, but you know, with like the different things, like the, you know, when people get involved, at least from, you know, from where I've seen, from when I've started to moving around in the different areas and talking with the different people, as long as we keep staying, you know, focused and being inclusive and not, you know, as has been mentioned, you know, where it becomes a, well, we're this group, you're that group, or, you know, this isn't it, you know, we just move forward. I think we're on the right path, and it just comes down the improvements, honestly, to just regular, keep getting better and learning. For the second question, actually, I think my view on that would be, without a revolutionary party, I don't think it would happen. I think we do need the party to, you know, make those changes, just the way kind of the whole system is done nowadays. Might, but I'll stick with that as my answer. Radical parties like the Black Panthers in the US, again, I like to look at, you know, the United Front, where we're all looking, you know, at these causes and changes that need to be made. So I kind of just look at, like Yvonne made the comment about, you know, well, we're agreeing on this, let's work under that. I mean, they have their group, not to, you know, split everything up, but, you know, with the United Front, we have our way, and if we can support, we support, right? And that's how I think moving forward. So I'll stick with kind of that answer.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Daniel?
Yeah, absolutely. Fun round of questions to close off. I'll go in reverse order. what do I think of radical parties such as the Black Panthers? Very pro Black Panthers. Fred Hampton is someone that's been quite inspiring to read about, and something I didn't realize until fairly recently, just how young he was when he was assassinated by the United States and the FBI through the COINTEL program. So also what inspired me with the Black Panthers, Fred Hampton in particular, was the foundation of the Rainbow Coalition, where even the Black Panthers, as initially as a defense organization of Black people from police, recognized that class was at the root of exploitation and oppression, not that Black people and other racialized people didn't experience oppression and exploitation in different ways than white people did, but that fundamentally there was a common enemy for both white and Black working class people, and that they needed to work together to achieve their common liberation. And I thought that was just a very, powerful idea. And it's an idea that today we can point to help cut through the weaponization of identity politics. I don't think the issue is so much identity politics. I think you can reword identity politics to mean intersectionality, just understanding that different people under capitalism will be treated in different ways in a very intentional way to divide up the working class. But I think identity politics gets weaponized when people reduce and ignore class politics and think that just by having a token person in charge of a certain political party means that something fundamentally changed. And I think people like Fred Hampton very eloquently argued against that, and we can point to these people and try and build on that legacy. Is it possible to achieve socialism without a revolutionary party? I think it's challenging. I think you can build up struggle without a revolutionary party, but whether or not you can fully take control from the capitalist class and then beyond that defend the revolution, I think it's an entirely different question. I think the task of seizing power and defending that power is difficult without some sort of centralization. That's precisely why socialists even advocate for a socialist intermediate step between capitalism and communism. The capitalism is entrenched, it defends itself vigorously. We need to respond in kind until we can do away with the whole bloody system. And what can we do better in SA? I agree, there's a lot of things we can do well. What can we do better? I always have a lot of ideas, and a lot of it is just expansion. It's capacity related. I think there's a lot of things that we would do better if we could do it better. And these are some of these things that will have to come as they come along. I think working with other groups, we've made a lot of headway in that area. And I think really just earnestly, continuing to redouble efforts to reach out to people and really impart how sincere we are to join them in our common struggle. I mean, we've been active in so many, it's hard to say what we can be doing, because even the things I think we could be doing better, I think we all agree we could be doing better. It's not an issue of agreeing on where we should be going. It's just realizing that it takes time to build these things. So I'll leave it there, but yeah, there's a million and one things we could also be doing. There's just so much time to be able to do things, and yeah, I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go back now to all three of you, starting with Daniel, then Chris, and then Yvonne. If you got any last words, something you might have missed, you would like to tell us, then do so. You have up to 3 minutes if you wish.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. And thanks for everybody tuning in, for the questions, for all the people that participated. Every educational conference is an achievement in and of itself. And it's always good to be able to reflect back on our ideas as they develop. So, in 3 years coming back to see what we're talking about today, it might be quite illuminating. I mean, all I'll say is building the mass revolutionary party, building the mass struggle is as much of a purpose for my life as I found. It's been that salve for the alienation and the isolation that comes with decrepit capitalist society, and it's a home in its own way. And so even if we can't guarantee the outcome of our struggle, like Gary alluded to earlier, at least I feel quite good knowing what I put my time in. As the world crumbled around us, I don't feel any shame in what I've put my effort towards, and I feel really proud of the people I've worked with and all the things I've learned and all the things we've been able to achieve together and all the things we hope to achieve. Because even if we don't achieve them, we really did struggle and strive for something better. And so if you're interested, if any of this intrigues you, you can work with us in 1,000,001 ways. It doesn't have to be through Socialist Action. Any of the United Front groups we've mentioned, just get involved, however which way. You have something to contribute. We all have something to contribute. Find that space where you feel most welcome and work like hell, fight like hell for the world that we all need.
Thanks, Daniel. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. And again, as Daniel said, thank you for everyone involved, from the organizers of the event and all the viewers and all the great questions that I wish I was more eloquent on answering. But I would like to say, yeah, for people to, who are hearing this maybe for the first time or not involved, get involved. Let spread the word around. Get friends and family, strangers. Let them know, because this is one world for all of us. It's we're fighting for a common good, for a common goal, and we can make a difference. So thank you, and thank you for everyone here.
Thank you, Chris. Yvonne?
Yeah, I mean, that was extremely well said, Chris, and I agree. I wish I had been more eloquent in answering the questions. You can tell which one I had time to type out responses to it. But yeah, thank you guys for listening. I appreciate it a lot. I had a lot of fun, and I really look forward to seeing all of you guys again in the near future. Also, just a reminder, I put this in the chat, but do like this video for engagement. This is like something very easy that you can do to advance the socialist message right now, and it does matter. So hit the like button and subscribe to the Socialist Action YouTube channel.
Thanks, Yvonne. Okay, well, I would like to say thank you to Cliff, to Emily, to Gary, Daniel, Yvonne, Chris, Yasin, and Josh. And of course, to our technical producer, Dave Enning, and our political producer, Barry Weisletter, and to everyone who participated in this conference, for those who are listening to me as I speak, and for those who will listen at a later time on YouTube. And please consider joining Socialist Action if you've heard, like what you've heard tonight, as Daniel said. To fill out membership application form, just visit our website at www.socialistaction.ca. If you would like to talk to us about joining SA, write to socialistactioncanada@gmail.com, or just call 647-986-1917. That's 647-986-1917. Also, as Yvonne said earlier, if you like this conference, please subscribe to the Socialist Action YouTube channel. The next SA webcast will occur in the new year. If you follow our stuff on Socialist Action Canada at the Gmail, or talk to us on the phone, you will find out everything that we do. And the next action for us will be a fun action. It's going to be a pre-holiday social in person here in Toronto on Saturday, December the 3rd at 5 p.m. at the OPSU building, 31 Wellesley Street East in Toronto. And for details, just visit www.socialistaction.ca. So now, please stay with us to join in the singing of the Internationale, led by Weiss. It's a recording and is led by Y.C. Lee from Toronto. Dave?
Arriba los pobres del mundo, de pie los esclavos sin pan, y gritemos todos unidos, viva la internacional. Removamos todas las trabas que nos impiden nuestro bien. Cambiemos el mundo de base, hundiendo el imperio burgués. Agrupémonos todos en la lucha final, y se alcen los pueblos por la internacional. Agrupémonos todos la terre, debout les forçats de la faim. La raison tendant son cratère, c'est l'éruption de la fin. Du passé faisant table rase, vous les slaves debout, debout. Le monde va changer de base, nous ne sommes rien, soyons deux. C'est la lutte finale, groupons-nous et demain l'international sera le genre humain. C'est la lutte finale, groupons-nous et demain l'international sera le genre humain. Arise, ye prisoners of starvation, arise, ye wretched of the earth. For justice thunders condemnation, for a better world's in a birth. No more traditions chain shall bind us, arise ye slaves, no more in thrall. The earth shall rise on new foundations, we have been not, we shall be all. 'Tis the final conflict, let each stand in its place. The international working class shall be the human race. 'Tis the final conflict, let each stand in its place. The international working class shall be the human race.
So this brings us to the end of our program. So see you all again soon in the new year. Bye.